A Map of Thought, Episode 3. Here is a question worth sitting with. Why do great companies, great families, and great empires so often fall apart right around the third generation? Not the first, not the 10th, the third.
And the man who answered that question did it more than 600 years ago, from inside a jail cell in North Africa, using a word most people still cannot pronounce.
Welcome back to the series. Today we are talking about Ibn Khaldun, spelled Ibn Khaldun, a 14th century judge, diplomat, and occasional prisoner of whoever happened to be winning that decade. If you have ever watched a scrappy startup turn into a soul-crushing bureaucracy, or watched a family business get destroyed by the grandkids, you already understand his most famous idea. You just did not have a name for it.
The name is Asabiya. Say it with me. Asabiya. It gets translated as group solidarity or social cohesion, but honestly the best translation might just be team spirit with teeth.
So let us set the scene, because this is not some professor who never left his library. Ibn Khaldun was born in Tunis in the year 1332, into a world of collapsing dynasties. He served as a judge, a diplomat, and an advisor to sultans across North Africa and Muslim Spain. He got imprisoned. He negotiated with warlords. At one point, he was lowered down the walls of Damascus in a basket to go meet the Mongol conqueror Tamerlane in person, to try to save the city.
This is the part people forget. His famous book, the Muqaddimah, which just means the introduction, was not written by someone hiding from the world. It was written by someone who had watched dynasty after dynasty rise, rot, and collapse, up close, sometimes while employed by the people collapsing.
So walk us through the actual theory. What is a Sabiya doing?
Think of it as the glue that lets a group of people act like one body. Ibn Khaldun was watching tribes out on the harsh edges of the desert, people with almost nothing, who survived because they trusted each other completely and fought for each other without hesitation. That bond, that fierce loyalty born from shared hardship, is a Sabiya at full strength. And his argument is that this raw solidarity is what actually builds empires. Not fancy palaces. Not clever laws. Group cohesion forged by struggle.
And then what happens once that tribe wins? Once they actually take the city?
This is the tragic part, and it is basically the whole book in one sentence. Success poisons the thing that created it. The tough desert generation conquers the soft, wealthy city. Their children grow up inside the palace instead of the desert, comfortable, educated, but never tested. Their grandchildren grow up surrounded by luxury, servants, and flattery, with no memory of the hardship that forged their ancestors. By then the Asabiya has thinned out into nothing, and the dynasty becomes ripe for the next hungry group waiting outside the walls.
He actually put a number on it, didn't he?
He did, and it is almost eerie how specific he gets. Ibn Khaldun argued a dynasty typically lasts about 4 generations, roughly a full human lifetime plus a bit, before that founding solidarity is spent. Founder, then the son who still remembers the hardship secondhand, then the grandson who only knows luxury, then decline.
Which is, word for word, the same pattern people describe in family wealth today. There is an old saying, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The first generation builds the fortune through grit. The second generation manages it comfortably. The third generation, who never had to build anything, spends it. Ibn Khaldun was describing empires, but he basically wrote the operating manual for every family business that falls apart once the founder's grandkids take over.
And it is not only families. Think about a startup. 10 people crammed into one room, no title on any door, everyone pulling all-nighters because they actually believe in the mission and they need each other to survive. That is a Sabiya in a hoodie. Fast forward a decade. Now there are layers of managers, a brand guidelines document, meetings about meetings, and half the staff could not tell you what the founding mission even was. The company did not get conquered by an outside army. It got conquered by its own comfort.
Now he was writing about North Africa specifically. Berber dynasties, Arab dynasties, waves of desert tribes rolling in and taking over settled cities, over and over for centuries. He watched it happen in his own lifetime, more than once.
Which is exactly why the theory has weight. This was not one story he heard once. It was a pattern he watched repeat itself, dynasty after dynasty, and he was taking notes the whole time, sometimes literally serving as the judge for the regime that was about to fall.
And this is where it gets fun for anyone who loves ancient history, because you can run his framework backward onto Rome, even though he never wrote a word about Rome directly. Early Rome, the Republic, was famously tough, disciplined, almost obsessively frugal. Senators who plowed their own fields. Soldiers who marched barefoot rather than complain. That is a Sabia Roman style.
And then Rome wins. It wins so completely that it swallows the entire Mediterranean world, and suddenly there is more wealth flowing into the city than anyone alive had ever imagined. Within a few generations, you get emperors more interested in chariot races and banquets than in frontier defense, and a citizenry increasingly detached from the sacrifices that built the whole system in the first place. Different continent, different century, same underlying disease.
So let us be honest about the pushback here, because good history should never be tidy. Critics have pointed out that Ibn Khaldun's model is basically a rise and fall curve applied to everything, and history sometimes refuses to cooperate with a clean cycle. Some dynasties lasted far longer than 4 generations. Some empires reformed themselves and got a second wind. The Ottoman state, for instance, kept renewing itself for centuries in ways his tidy cycle does not fully explain.
And modern historians will also tell you he was writing primarily about a specific kind of tribal, dynastic state, and it is a stretch to apply his framework directly onto, say, a modern industrial democracy with elections and courts and central banks. Institutions can substitute for raw tribal solidarity in ways his theory does not fully account for. So treat this as a powerful lens, not a physics equation.
Fair, but the lens is genuinely hard to unsee once you have it, especially right now. Because in 2026, this exact argument is being run on living superpowers.
Right. Listen to how people talk about the United States. Founded by a scrappy, sacrificing generation, built into the dominant global power through the mid-20th century, and now, depending who you ask, softening into internal division, debt, and institutional gridlock. That is a very Ibn Khaldun-shaped argument, whether the people making it know his name or not.
And it gets aimed at China with just as much energy, from the opposite direction. Some analysts argue China is still in its high Asabiyya phase, a disciplined, sacrificing rise. Others argue its own leadership already worries openly about corruption, complacency, and a wealthy new generation that never experienced the hardship their grandparents did. Same framework, pointed at a completely different empire, and serious people disagree hard about which stage either country is actually in.
Which is the honest way to leave it. Nobody credible knows for certain whether a given great power is in year 1 of its Asabiyya or year 100 of its decline. Ibn Khaldun does not hand you a prophecy. He hands you a diagnostic question. Are the people currently running this thing still connected to whatever hardship built it, or have they only ever known the palace?
And that question is not just for presidents and sultans. Ask it about your own team at work. Ask it about your own family. Is the culture you are part of still running on the grit that built it, or is it coasting on inherited comfort, waiting for someone hungrier to show up?
That is really why the 600-year-old judge from Tunis still matters. He was doing sociology and economics before either word existed, not from a university chair, but from the middle of actual political collapse, taking notes while the walls came down around him.
So here is the honest motivational punch of Ibn Khaldun. Cohesion is not something you inherit forever. It is something you have to keep earning, generation after generation, deal after deal, quarter after quarter. The moment you assume your team, your family, or your country will hold together automatically, without the hardship that forged it in the first place, is the moment the clock quietly starts running out.
Which sets up a very different kind of question for next time. Ibn Khaldun asked what holds a group together. His answer was blood, loyalty, and shared hardship. But a few centuries later, in a much colder and much more contractual Europe, two very different thinkers are going to ask that same question and land on a completely different answer.
Not solidarity. Consent. Next time, Hobbes and Locke, and the argument that society is not a tribe you are born loyal to. It is a deal you agree to. See you then.